Welcome to Clarion West's Summer Craft Talk series. Traditionally, the instructors of our summer 6-week workshop introduce themselves to the cohort at the beginning of their week of instruction. Many give additional advice on the craft of short fiction throughout the week. This year, in the absence of a 6-week workshop, we asked each of them to prepare a craft talk for the cohort that could be shared more widely with Write-a-thon participants. Tonight, I'm excited to introduce Andy Duncan. Andy's work sits at the juncture of Southern and speculative fiction. His wide-ranging stories are peopled with figures like Renaissance Saint Thomas More, writers Zora Neale Hurston and Flannery O'Connor, to folks who aren't exalted in the white American canon, but nevertheless are keystones of Americana, like Indigenous iron workers in 1920s Manhattan. From tall tales to alien encounters, Andy writes with cinematic flair and humor. Andy has received a Nebula Award, a Theodore Sturgeon Memorial Award, and 3 World Fantasy Awards. He's a Clarion West graduate and teaches writing as a professor at Frostburg State University. We're happy to have you with us today, Andy.
Well, thank you. I did a craft, a 4-week, briskly thrown together with the help of Tegan Moore and the Clarion West folks in April on the topic of performing your work, of doing readings. And so when they invited me to do a craft talk tonight, I decided that that would be a useful topic, in part because it's all fresh on my mind and I have all the notes and so forth. Although the first thing I did, of course, was update all the notes and add another page or 2 to it, which I believe they'll be sharing with you guys if they haven't already, the handout in effect. But before I start talking about readings, I need to admit some of my own biases and some of my own ignorances, if you will. I've been doing, I entered the field basically in fall of 1993 as a student in creative writing at North Carolina State University. But my real introduction to the field was that following summer at Clarion West in Seattle in '94. And since then, I've lost count. I've done scores and scores and scores of readings on 3-person reading panels, as solo things, as headliners, as last-minute additions to the program, late at night in bars, beside pools, in sitting at the foot of beds in crowded con suites. I've done it all sorts of ways. But all my quarter-century experience doing it has been virtually all non-virtual. So many others have more experience doing readings in this sort of format than I do. The Nebula Conference 2020, which you can still register for, even though the live events are over, all the videos and all the transcripts of all the panels will be up for a year. And there was a very good panel on video tips for writers, much of which shaded over into tips for reading and performance on video. So I recommend that to you. I know some of you already were at the conference because I ran into you there in the virtual spaces. But if anybody has any trouble accessing that or needs to access that, just let me know that, and I'm happy to share. The other sort of ignorance I have is that almost all experience doing public readings has been as a reading fiction. A number of you are poets. While much I have to say will overlap and be the same, obviously poets have a different set of expectations, and there's some obviously different things about reading a 10-poem evening as opposed to reading a single fiction piece of an evening. And so I have to put that out there. Also, some of you are playwrights, I hope more craft oriented and less of a ham than I am. And therefore, some of you have experience doing one-person monologues, writing dramatic monologues, memorizing them, and acting them out, performing them. I have almost no experience doing that. So what I'm talking about is purely the fiction. But one thing that's not covered on that handout, I just realized sitting here, is why do readings at all? A friend of mine years ago, who is an avid reader, but was never part of the fiction writing life, asked me once in all sincerity, Andy, said, I'm not really making fun, but I've heard you talk for years about doing readings, going to readings. I've never been to one. What happens at a reading? And I tried my best to explain to him honestly exactly what a fiction reading was like. And he nodded his head and he nodded his head and he asked a couple small questions. And when I was finally done with all this, he said, I don't mean to be insulting, but that just sounds tedious. Why would anyone do that? Why would anyone? And I had to admit that to those of us who are not writers, to those of us who are not performers, this seems like a very odd thing. Even people who read most of their books as audiobooks with their ear and not just their eye, even that is a very different thing than going and sitting in a group of 50 people when Sarah Pinsker debuts her collection, for example, in Baltimore. I was happy to be there that night. It's just a very odd thing. And while you will get, and a number of you already have had experience, many of you will, with remarkable speed, start getting invitations to participate on panels, to do readings. If you're in a particular issue of a magazine or an anthology, if you got involved with a Kickstarter project, and to promote that, 5 people are going to be reading and they want you to be one of them. Sometimes you will be asked to read on a program simply because you attended Clarion West or are going to attend Clarion West. And that will be sufficient credit for the organizer. So if you haven't got the call yet from somebody, you will very soon. Most of us do that. Yes, we're nervous. Yes, we worry about everything, but we do it and we keep doing it and we get better at it the more we do it. And sometimes we even enjoy it. We enjoy the process. But not everyone does. If you just don't like to read your own work in front of people, you don't have to. Now, you would be a bit unusual, but I can name writers who just don't do readings. They prefer to be, even if they're a guest of honor, they prefer to be interviewed, for example, or be in conversation with another writer, a friend of theirs, perhaps, or a critic who's written about them. Or they would prefer to be on a panel. I have heard writers say, please, please, put me on panels, but don't give me a reading. Please don't. And that might be you. There are even a very few writers in our field who just don't do public appearances at all. They are really unusual, but it can happen. If you're not doing any of that sort of thing, then just know that you have to spend a lot of work being A, brilliant, and B, finding other ways to get your name out there and for people to get to know you. So if all this strikes you with horror, I just wanted to say at the outset, fine, maybe you're one of those, put me on a panel, please. Okay, so the handout that y'all are going to get has a lot of bullet points, a lot of categories, because I don't want to go more than too much longer tonight. I don't want to go more than like a half hour or so, and I'm already 9 minutes in. I'm going to like just focus on the big categories of the preparing for the reading, the doing the reading, and then some of the lifelong habits you want to get into. And I finally have a caveat about the whole reading process, but my caveat is so good that I'm going to save it for the last. Okay, so don't go to sleep until that comes. You want to find out, all this is under preparation now. It takes a lot longer to prepare for a reading than it does to do the reading. You want to find out as much as you can about the gig, the venue, the audience, the organizer's expectations. What happened with the last fool that came in that you don't want to do that? Maybe you'll look better in contrast. Find out as much as you can and act on that information. Try to fit yourself to the expectations, to the audience you're going to have. A Nebula conference audience, a WisCon audience, a World Fantasy audience is going to be very different from the Tuesday book club at the public library. Very different. Memorize this handy mnemonic device. 20 is plenty. Even if they give you an hour, even if they say we want you to go 45 minutes and then take questions, 20 minutes for almost every reader is plenty. You start going over that, people start to shift. People start to lose track of you. People start to think about whether they're hungry. You know, they get distracted. And we've all been in that audience, or we've all been on the panel when the first reader was assigned 20 minutes and they go 15 minutes and they go right past 20 minutes and they do 25 and they do 30 and the moderator is asleep at the switch and they go 35 and nobody is happy. Absolutely nobody is happy. Do those unhappy people talk about that writer afterward? Yes, they do. You don't want to be that person, right? 20 is plenty. If you are Neil Gaiman, you can disregard that advice. I have been in audiences where people were happy to pay good money to watch Neil talk and read and perform for 90 minutes or more. An exception. There are other exceptions in our field, but mostly not the likes of us, not yet. What to read? All other things being equal, and I'm looking at my notes here. Read from the newest thing that's ready. Ideally, probably something that has a publication date attached to it, if you're fortunate enough to have one. Otherwise, something that is at least finished enough to read this part of it. Because you may not know what the ending of the story is, but you sure do know what the beginning is. You've got this scene pretty well nailed. And it's fine to read an excerpt of fiction as opposed to read the entirety. Unless you're writing flash, in which case you have a great advantage over long-winded people like me. But the vast majority of people who do readings do excerpts. And if you take this thing that is reasonably finished or coming out in the near future, well, what part of it to read? A nice default to look at is whether the opening is going to work. The first 10 pages or 15 pages. Why do I say the opening? Well, usually that's the part that requires the least setup, because the reader reading that piece, whether it's in an ebook, an audiobook, an online zine, or in paper, they're going to see nothing probably but the title and the author, and then there they go. They're going to read the first sentence and they're off. So you shouldn't have to preface the excerpt by talking for 10 minutes about the magic system or the tech of the space habitat or what have you. So openings are useful in that respect. You don't always want to write, you don't always want to read the opening. Sometimes you haven't written the opening yet. You've written a middle section. Or you just prefer the middle section. Or you think the opening is going to work fine when it's published, but it may be in a very different voice from a later section that fits your mouth better. There are various reasons. You may just love the middle more. But think about the things that hold audiences' attention. Think about, for example, conflict, suspense, dialogue, humor. Don't force it, but if there's witty elements, if there's something in the story that might generate a laugh, nothing wrong with picking that. If, by the way, you do get a laugh, wait for the laugh. Don't step on it, and don't be thrown. I have seen writers get an unexpected laugh and like lose their place or be very obviously confused. That comes with practice. It's often not going to be the passage of the most beautiful, mellifluous prose. You may have this amazing Tolkien-like ability to describe, the journey of your characters or whatever. Unless you're really a performer, that can be harder to hold the audience's attention. Don't rush it. You're not an auctioneer. I jumped ahead. See, I was supposed to be talking about prep and selection, and you already got me thinking about the actually doing. The only other thing I want to say about prep is that, yes, you should, once you've picked this piece, you should rehearse, you should practice. You particularly want to rehearse the pronunciations, because we've all been in that audience, and many of my undergraduates, bless their hearts, I asked them to read the first page of their stories, and they stumble over it as if they've never seen it before. And no, they didn't plagiarize it. I know that I helped them get that far, but they haven't practiced it, and they can't even pronounce their own names. They're so nervous. Don't do that. rehearse the pronunciations, including of the words you made up, because we spec-fic writers love to do the Delaney thing and the Burgess thing and make up languages. But practice those, and particularly practice your timing. Time yourself. Time the fast version, time the slow it down and practice that version. Do a mix where you vary your cadences. Get the timing down, because you don't want to go in thinking that you've got a 20-minute piece and discover in the middle that you've really got a 40-minute piece. And that will throw you. You want to practice that. All right, the actual reading, skipping ahead here. If there's a mic, use it. Somebody in the audience needs that microphone, and you need that microphone more than you think you do. If there is no microphone, you need to be loud, louder than you think. Not everybody has equal hearing in both ears, and who knows what the people in the back of the room or the side of the room are getting conflict from the hallway or whatever, or the annoying person next to them that keeps whispering. Keep your introduction short. I don't mean the introduction that your introducer did before you got up there, because God help you, there's nothing you can do about their introduction. If they've written a dissertation on you and they want to read the whole thing, you're just going to have to suffer it. Or if they're your oldest friend and they want to tell every embarrassing story about when you were at Clarion West, you can't stop that either. But no, I'm talking about once you're up there and you say, thank you all, keep your introductions relatively terse. Some humor works if you're not reading something very grim. A little self-deprecation doesn't hurt. If humor is not in your wheelhouse normally, don't force it. People don't expect it. They're just pleasantly surprised when they get it. As you're reading, perform it. Be an actor. You don't have to have memorized it. You don't have to be charging about the stage like Ian McKellen doing his one-man Shakespeare. But make some gestures, vary your cadence, vary your volume. Do something to slightly distinguish the speakers in a dialogue. Even if you're like just looking back and forth like, really? Yes, really. That sort of thing goes a long way. One of my students in April said, that sounds hokey. And I said, son, I've been hokey all my life. I've been hokey for a quarter century, I guess. Whatever you're comfortable with. But don't rush it. I was rushing myself. I jumped ahead to that point earlier. Don't rush it. I've seen people try to fit a 30-minute story into a 15-minute slot by racing through it. You're not doing the story any favor if you do that. Make eye contact with your audience or fake it. If it unnerves you to look in people's eyes, then look at their foreheads or look at their hairline or look just above the tops of their head. It will read to them like you're making eye contact, and that keeps people focused. And that takes some practice too, because you'll be looking back and forth at your text. I keep forgetting that my eye contact, by the way, needs to be with my camera and not with my lovely image in the corner of the screen. So just pretend if I look away, I'm looking at your neighbor. I will tell you the Michael Swanwick rule. It is brilliant. Only Michael Swanwick ever told me this. I've never heard it from anyone else. but I tell everybody, and I credit him. How do you account for a page break when you're reading? I've seen people just say page break. I've seen people go ... or something. Hashtag. What Michael Swanwick recommends is that you announce at the beginning, there are some page breaks here, and whenever I hit a page break, I'm going to take a drink of water. And then when you hit the page break, you do that. You're going to need water at some point. And I just think that's a beautiful solution. And sometimes when I have read pieces where the page breaks are like on cliffhangers, then it becomes funny and the joke builds, you know, when something dire is looming and then I stop and leisurely take a drink of water and people laugh and so on and so on. But so I advise you all to do that. Invoke the Michael Swanwick rule at the beginning of your reading and do that and credit Michael Swanwick because he deserves it. It's brilliant. Stick to your time, never go over. I wear a wristwatch, as many people no longer do, but boy, do I use it at a reading. I take it off my wrist and I set it up on the lectern or on the table in front, and I keep track of that analog hand going around. I also have my digital timer on the phone, which tends to unnerve me. Seeing all those digits tick off, it's like a nuclear countdown or something. So I usually just look at the analog hand, but keep track of it. If you're going to have a little more room at the end than you thought, then that's fine. If it looks like you're going to run a little late, maybe skip something so that you can get to that thing you wanted to end on, that cliffhanger or that punchline or that final really good line that you really want to get to. But never go over. That's the cardinal sin. Don't go over. All right, that was all during the reading. What are a couple of things you should do, like as a sort of lifelong student of this stuff? Because I'm still learning. Neil Gaiman's still learning. Everybody's still learning. Nnedi Okorafor, everybody you can think of is still working to get better at these things, even if they're already brilliant like those two are. As lifelong habits, go to other people's reading. Go to the people you know are going to be great that you can learn from. Go to your friends' readings to support them. But please, 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 go to unknown people's readings too. Support them. Boy, am I proud that I was in the front row, I think, for Siobhan Carroll's first reading at a World Fantasy Convention in Ohio a few years ago. And I knew she had never read at a World Fantasy Convention before. It turned out, she told me, she had never done a reading anywhere before. She made her debut at the World Fantasy Convention. She had a couple stories out. Most people didn't know her. She was writing then under a pseudonym. It was a pretty good crowd because a bunch of us wanted to see this new person. And she was great. She's just fabulous. And boy, now we can all dine out for years. Hey, I was at Siobhan Carroll's first reading. But you want to do that. You want to support newcomers all the time. You want to do that when you are a newcomer, and you want to do that when you are a grizzled veteran. So go and support new people and talk them up. Say, you know who's really good? I went to their reading and it's great, etc. Also become a student of performance. And by that, I mean get involved if you can in community theater. On stage, ideally, that's great practice. It's been great practice for me. But even backstage or as a patron, as a season ticket holder or something. So you're there on opening night. Or you're watching their live stream during pandemic when they're performing before cameras, as we all are. And pay attention to the performers. Look at how they put the lines across, the dialogue. Look how they move their bodies. Look how they command the stage. Many of us music fans, we love concert films. We love watching performers in clubs, at festivals. Look at the people that really command a stage. And how do they do it? It's not usually because they're flinging about all the while. It's usually just because they're so centered in themselves and they're so confident, or they're faking it because they may be as nervous as you and I. When you're watching movies or TV shows, don't just geek out over your favorite performer, and don't just, look at it as writers and overanalyze the plot and the plot holes and so forth. Also look at the performers and focus on the people that may not be the lead performers, but look at that supporting player who had only the one monologue or that one brief dialogue. How do they hold interest? How do they hold the camera? This is fascinating. And one reason I watch movies on TV all the time is because I just follow performers around just to see what they're doing. I look forward to Holland Taylor's Ann Richards one-woman play that was on Great Performances the other night. I recorded it because Holland Taylor is great in everything. So I'm just loving the idea of 90 minutes of Holland Taylor showing us what she can do without having to deal with other performers and so on. All right, here's that final thing I wanted to say that I was so proud of, because I'm at 30 minutes. Final thing I wanted to say was, your writing will last. There are countless ways your writing is going to last once it is written. But your readings are ephemeral. Even when readings are recorded and the audio and the video and are archived and you can access them later, with rare exceptions, something's missing. The old cliche goes, you had to be there, but you really did have to be there. They don't capture all that. Any of you that have ever been to a musical performance that happened to be recorded that showed up later in a concert film or on a live album knows what this is like, because that is one experience, but having been there as a participant is a very different experience, different energy. All the more true for the performers, for the readers. So that sounds depressing, but it's not, because not every reading is going to go well. Walk away, say, "Fala, do better next time." Shake it off. Don't worry about it. When it goes very well, when it's just everything is spot on and the energy in the room is amazing and you're getting incredible waves of energy just from your introduction and the first stray remarks you make, and the parts you thought were mildly funny are just laying waste to the audience. They're just convulsing. They're loving it so much. Don't brood on that either. That doesn't mean you're so brilliant. It just means it was a very lucky set of circumstances. The stars were aligned. And shake that off too. Walk away and say, okay, that doesn't mean I'm going to be so brilliant next week or next month. You know, let it go. Readings are ephemeral, but they can be very important ways that you get your name out there, you get your work out there. People come to feel that you're like a person, a presence. And that is certainly true in the 21st century in the social media landscape, but it was always true. I became fans for life of writers I saw, like Lee Smith, the novelist, when I was an undergrad at the University of South Carolina. And I had read nothing she wrote, but she did a reading. And I thought, wow, this is great. And then everything I read after that from her, I heard her voice. So you can build a following just from reading, if you want to.